Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us this evening, whether you're with us in person in our sanctuary or live on the stream. I do invite you to join me in singing a Shabbat Nigun together. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai 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 la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la.
Shabbat Shalom. We welcome those of you who are here in our sanctuary, and we welcome all of you who are at home or elsewhere joining us virtually. If you are in the Chicago area, you know that we've been challenged with some weather last night, certainly, and some of you are in Arizona or in Las Vegas or in California, and I bet you are feeling very fortunate. But we create a sense of warmth in Shabbat, this sacred time to be together. We welcome Shabbat together with first lighting Shabbat candles on page 2 of your prayer book, if you have that in front of you.
Please join me in singing our Shabbat candle blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
And we join together welcoming each other with words from King David from the book of Psalms, how good it is and sweet for brothers, for sisters, for family, for friends, for a community to be united together as one. Hine Matov on page 10.
Hine Matov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Sheverachim gam yachad, hine matov u'manayim. Sheverachim gam yachad, hine matov u'manayim. Sheverachim gam yachad, matov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad.
And on page 13, from Psalm 96, sing to Adonai a new song, Shiru Adonai Shir Chadash.
Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Sing unto God all the earth a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing along. All the earth a new song unto God.
welcome the Sabbath Bride, the Sabbath Queen, Lecha Dodi, page 20 and 21.
Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Shamor v'zachor b'diburecha, Hishmi'anu el hamiyuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad, Shemo tiferet v'lihila. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Likrat Shabbat, lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mekor habaracha. Merosh mekedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshava tehila. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, Kam besimcha uvtzola, Toch emunei am segula, Boi chala, Boi chala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat, Mikabelah.
We turn to page 28. The formal part of the service worship begins by praising God who's to be praised, praising God who's to be praised now and forever. If you're comfortable rising physically or in spirit, we join together in the Baruch Hu.
Yai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
The bottom, page 31. This is an hour of change. Within it, we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it, we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai Hamariv Aravim. As we enter the Shema, Hear, O Israel, Adonai our God, Adonai is one, page 34.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Shem kevod malchuto, leolam va'ed. Baruch Shem kevod malchuto, leolam va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad.
Please be seated. We turn to page 40, the Song of the Sea, as the children of Israel left Egypt, crossed the Sea of Reeds, coming to Sinai and freedom. This is the song they sang.
Elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, noratehi lo rosefele, noratehi lo rosefele. Mahudecha ra'u barecha, chokeach yariv be'Moshe u'Miriam, ze'elianu ve'averu, ze'elianu ve'averu. Adonai
On page 43 at the bottom, give us a place to rest, Adonai our God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are true protection and safety, and in your presence are acceptance and gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth, prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace, your Shabbat Shalom, over all we love, over our Jerusalem and yours.
Baruch atah Adonai haborei Shabbat Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai haborei Shabbat Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim Shalom. Baruch atah Adonai haborei Shabbat Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael.
And on page 46 and 47, as we prepare for the Amidah, the central prayer invites God's presence to suffuse our spirits, God's will to prevail in our lives. Prayer may not bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city, but prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, rebuild a weakened will. If you're comfortable standing physically or spiritually, we join together on page 46, asking God to open our lips that our mouths may declare God's praise.
Adonai, sefatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 48.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה.
We turn to page 50, the second of the benedictions the Gevurot. Pay special attention to the parts that are in parentheses. You are forever mighty, Adonai. You give life to all. You cause the wind to shift and rain to fall. You sustain life through love, giving life to all, through great compassion, supporting the fallen, healing the sick, freeing the captive, keeping faith with those who sleep in the dust. Who is like you, source of mighty acts, who resembles you, a sovereign who takes and gives life, causing deliverance to spring up, and faithfully gives life to all. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives life to all. Baruch atah Adonai, mechaye hakol. And on 52, Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim b'chol yom yahalelucha selah, Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Praised are you, Adonai, the holy God. Please be seated. At the top of page 55, may these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day, and may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh haShabbat. Blessed is the Eternal One who sanctifies Shabbat. Let's take a moment now for our own prayers, our own thoughts and meditations as we follow either in the prayer book or in our own thoughts and join back again with Oseh Shalom on page 62.
Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen, amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen.
We turn to page 253 as we offer prayers of healing, well-being, comfort, and strength. Misha Beirach Avotenu Avraham Yitzhak v'Yaakov v'Motenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yavarech v'Yirapeh Kol Chahalim. May the one who blessed our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our mothers Sarah, Becca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal, guide, support, comfort all those who seek your healing and love. If you wish to share names either in the chat or here in the sanctuary, please do. Baruch atah Adonai rofeh hacholim. Blessed is the one who heals the sick.
Yishabeirach avoteinu mikor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength who blessed the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Yishabeirach imotenu kor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
So I am continuing in this series of Friday night sermons based on my sense of how I have learned and grown over these past 40 years as a rabbi. And tonight I want to talk about immortality and afterlife and death to some extent. And looking back, having been ordained in 1980 from Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, I was 30 years old. What did I know? What did I know about afterlife or death or any of those things? If I had been at a Catholic seminary, and I'm sure my wife is happy that I wasn't, but if I had been at a Catholic seminary, we would have been studying heaven and hell and purgatory and limbo, and there was a whole theology built around the afterlife, about redemption and resurrection, about sin, about reward and punishment. And when I first began my rabbinate, I would often meet with interfaith couples, and typically the non-Jewish partner would say to the Jewish partner, well, what does Judaism say about the afterlife, about death, and what comes afterwards? And the Jewish partner would say, I don't know. We never talked about that. And I have to tell you, I'm not so sure I was very much help to those people, because, in fact, it was never a central idea in my training. Oh, there was some discussion of what Jacob meant when he said that he would go down with his white hair into Sheol to be with his fathers. Or when Joseph, again, said, make sure that I am buried with my fathers, my mothers, in the generations. In rabbinics, later on in Talmud, there's some discussion of what's called the yeshiva shamala. In other words, the study house on high. What the rabbis saw as the afterlife was that they would be able to continue studying in their study halls, except instead of on earth, in heaven. But it was never kind of so well worked out as it is in parts, certainly, of Christian theology. It's not central to Jewish thought. My good friend, Rabbi Eric Yaffe, who was the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, said at the time of his own retirement that he was not sure he believed in life after death, he just believed in life before death, which is why he was retiring. And that is somewhat insightful, because even Buber said, Judaism is about the here and now. It's not about the afterlife. Now, the day of my bar mitzvah, when I was 13, that Saturday morning, going to synagogue, reading from Torah, but in that evening, it was my grandfather's yortzeit. So my father and his brothers all went for the yortzeit to an Orthodox synagogue nearby. I believe it was Rabbi Yechiel Pupko's father's synagogue, but I can't be sure if Rabbi Pupko was the one teaching that night. But I went with them because now I was a bar mitzvah. I made up part of the minyan, and I'll never forget the story that the rabbi told in the tish, the tabletop discussion after the service. He told a story that I then have used myself and published in this book about heaven and hell. It's a simple story. A righteous man goes to heaven, having died. He's welcomed into heaven and given one gift, one choice, and one wish. And he says, well, I'm kind of surprised I'm here in heaven. I never expected that. But it would mean a lot more to me if I could compare it with what hell's like. And so sure enough, they temporarily sent him down to hell so he could see what hell was like. And he walks into this great room, a banquet hall, and there's this long table filled with wonderful food, every imaginable food you could think of, with the aromas wafting up, and he's starving for this wonderful food, and he looks at the people, and they're all wan and pale, and they're starving. And he tries to figure out why, and there are people seated on either side of the table, and he notices that everyone has a long wooden spoon attached to above their elbow, and they can reach the food, but they can't feed themselves. He says, that's a pretty good metaphor for what hell's like. So he goes back up to heaven, and he enters heaven, and he walks into the same exact banquet hall with all the same food and all the same aromas, and the people are satisfied and happy and wonderful. And he looks, and they too have these long wooden spoons attached to their arms above the elbow, but they're sitting across from each other and feeding each other. So that was this humanistic understanding of what heaven and hell was. We make our own heavens and our own hells, and it's what we do that allows that to happen. And so I've always loved that story, and so therefore published it in this book. But it is wrong to dismiss Jewish thought as if it has no role in the concept of afterlife. Rabbi Neil Gilman, who taught at Jewish Theological Seminary, wrote a very important book in the year 2000 called The Death of Death, which is about Jewish thoughts on death, afterlife, and resurrection. And he goes through Jewish tradition and says there absolutely is this belief in the afterlife and resurrection, even in physical, bodily resurrection at the time of the Messiah. That when the Messiah comes in the Messianic age, people will have bodily resurrection. At least that is part of Jewish tradition. It's not terribly emphasized. It is emphasized, by the way, among Chabad. Chabad believes that more or less the world in which we live is only a temporary world and an illusion, and the real world is in the world to come. But that's not mainstream. And even Maimonides said that the idea of resurrection was really a spiritual resurrection, not a physical one. So when we were reading the second blessing of the Amidah in the Gevurot, I said pay attention to what was in the brackets in the parentheses, because when one of the key aspects of classical Reform Judaism from Germany on was to change the prayer in that specific prayer which says, Mechaye Meitim, who gives life to the dead, that was something that the rationalists, the scientific thinkers of the 19th century absolutely could not accept. So they changed that word from mechaye meitim, who gives life to the dead, to mechaye hakol, who brings life to all. Back when Mishkan Tefillah was happening, there were elements within the Reform movement, within the Reform liturgical world, that wanted to return back to the more traditional. And there was a battle that went on, and they couldn't agree. So naturally, they couldn't agree, so they put in both versions, so that you have a choice of saying Mechaye Meitim or Mechaye Hakol. I have to tell you, I fought that battle for Hakol, for all, and I was very much against putting in who gives life to the dead. But that kind of defines a bit the kind of conflict that exists within modern reform. But even understanding Mechaye Meitim, who gives life to the dead, I can understand that only in terms of metaphor or symbolism. And it remains not the mainstream concept within Judaism. But at the same time, as I grew as a rabbi, I dealt with death a great deal. And I certainly dealt with the death of my own parents. And one of the ways I understood their death was a sense of eternality. There's something that lasts. There is something that is forever and ever. And it is that which is kind of defeats the nature of death. That I had written a sermon called The Empty Chair that talked about the story of David and his closest friend Jonathan. And Jonathan says to David, there's a banquet coming up. Your chair will be empty. You will be missed. And I used that idea to say that at our Passover Seders, at our Hanukkah dinners, at birthdays and anniversaries, the people who we've been closest to over time, oftentimes that chair is empty. There is metaphorically a chair at the table where we feel their spiritual presence, and that spiritual presence stays with us even when the physical is not there. And so this idea of what is eternal, what lasts, continued to be influential in my way of thinking. But in thinking about death itself, I think it was very important always to look at death not as punishment or reward. And so I've often emphasized at the high holidays the prayer Untitled Chapter, which is very problematic for many people because it says that there is a God who has this book of life and determines who's going to live and who's going to die, who by water, who by fire, who by thirst, who by hunger, who by wild beast. And it appears to be reward punishment. And I've rejected that and said that what it says is it's going to be something. It's going to be something. It's going to be fire or water, hunger or thirst. It's going to be heart or cancer. It's going to be something that's going to happen to us. And it's not a reward or punishment. It is what happens. It is the reality. And then in Untitled Chapter it says, U'teshuva, u'tefila, u'tzedakah, ma'avirin et roach zeirah, but repentance, prayer, and charity tempers the bitterness of what happens. And so that we have power, we have control over what we do with prayer, repentance, charity. We have control over that. We may not have control over all the things that may happen to us, or whether it happens next year or in 20 years or in 30 years, but we do have control over the choices we make in life. One of the most influential books, certainly in my thinking, was by Harold Kushner, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And it was when bad things happen to good people. That theology of this is what happens in the world, and now what are you going to do with it? And I think what I've noticed in these past 30 years for sure is that the role that hospice has played, and hospice influence is really about that same period of time. The understanding of what death means and how we accept death. And one of the things that taught me the most was about 6 weeks before my own mother's death, she emerged out of a nap, out of a back room, her bedroom where she was napping, came out and said, "This is the happiest time of my life." Now, in reading about hospice as well, that's not an unusual statement. What my mother meant by it was that this was a time she knew she was dying, but that her life made sense, that her life was fulfilled. She had achieved what she never expected to achieve in growing up in the Depression. And I don't mean just, material goods, but that her life worked, and so she was happy. And one of my favorite stories is the death of my father. My father was dying, and I came into Pittsburgh to visit, and my sister was there, and my brother already lived there, my mother was there. And so when my sister picked me up from the airport, naturally the first thing we did was we stopped at the deli on the way in, so we would have some lunch. And I go in and visit my father, come back into the kitchen, we start having lunch, and my father calls out from the bedroom and says, "What's going on?" I said, "We're having lunch." He says, "What are you having?" He said, "Corned beef sandwich." He said, "Bring me some." So we cut up about this much of a corned beef sandwich for him, brought it to him. He said, "What else?" He said, "Well, there are pickles." He said, "Bring me some." So again, about this much of pickle we brought him. And then maybe a couple soup spoons of matzo ball soup. And then he wanted to know what was for dessert, and we had Rocky Road ice cream, so he had his Rocky Road ice cream with his corned beef and matzo ball and pickle. And I said to my father, "You're not dying, you're pregnant." Well, there's a part of this death process, afterlife process, that really is birth. And as my father was lying there with also, giving him some water, some ice water, what we used, we ran out of the little sponges, we used some gauze, just dipping the gauze in the ice water. And I'm thinking, this is what we do at a bris. And I know so many of you have dealt with death very close up. And if you think about it, there's so many ways in which it really is infancy. That we deal with someone dying in the way we deal with an infant. And so in that way, I think there's this feeling that there's a birth process going on. So a birth process is also the creation process. And let me more or less conclude with the creation story itself, because I think it explains my theology about death and afterlife as well as anything I know. And it's a story of the creation of humans. Adam, man, human, from Adamah, from earth. Earthling from earth, human from humus, and then God forms the earth stuff and breathes into the earth stuff, Ruach Elohim, breath of God. And that's what animates us. And when we die, the breath leaves, and we're left with the clay earth vessel. But the breath never dies. The breath is the wind. The breath is the ruach. There's no more wind today than there ever was in all of history. That's never changed. And that our breath is eternal. And that when I say that there is eternality, that's what I mean. That there is something that lives on after us and continues after us that may not be physical, but is very much there. And when we talk about the breath of God being breathed into Adam, human, that's the beginning of the book of Genesis. That's the beginning of the Torah. The end of the Torah is the death of Moses. And Moses dies. And Moses has to die. Moses dies alone. But the rabbis say that when it came time for Moses to die, God took away his breath with a kiss, and that the breath returned back to God, that was the same breath as was breathed into Adam. And I really do understand personally that what is eternal is that divine spirit within us. And whether it is a physical eternality or a spiritual one or a metaphoric one, it is something that lasts. And I believe that who we are and what we do does last and has meaning and has significance and has permanence. And that's my concept of what is afterlife. Shabbat Shalom.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we love. Their memories keep shining, ever brighter though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. Yesh kochavim she'oram magia arza, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ונם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שהנים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך.
We continue on page 282. Again, if you're comfortable standing physically or in spirit, we join for the Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ועושה ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים, ובאלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים, משתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Page 287.
ונאמר, וחיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Page 293. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We think of all of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. On this Shabbat, we recall especially the beloved memories of those whose yortzites, anniversaries of death, occurred during this time and during this season, as well as those whose more recent death of these past 30 days of Shloshim is keenly felt by family and friends and community. We recall especially the beloved memories of Sylvia T. Liederman, Helene M. Krensky, Edith R. Hall, Ben Ehrenberg, Claire Frazis, Louise Pierce, Ruth Kaplan, Melvin Herbert Wolfson, Estelle Schiller, Sheldon Weiss, Joseph Andelman, Alexander Sanders, Jerome James Jerry Brosnan, the Honorable Judge Alan Greiman, Josephine Joe Minnow, Aaron Epstein. Other names you wish to share? If you wish to add names on the chat, please do. Zecher Tzadikim Livracha, may the memory of the righteous be an abiding blessing. On page 294, we say together, Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, b'galav v'zman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam almei almaya, yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'tromam v'yitnaseh, v'tadar v'yitalev v'yithalau, shemei d'kudashah barichu, leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, ba'miram bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabbah min shamaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace grant peace to all who mourn, comfort to all who are bereaved. Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mamav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael.
Shabbat Shalom.